Good morning. Good morning, everyone. If we can take our seats and get started, which I think also means I'm going to be blinded for a moment here. Greetings. I'm Bob Giannino. I am the outgoing Anson President and CEO of the United Way of Massachusetts Bay. And it is an honor and privilege to be here with you all today. It's great to see a room full of friends, policymakers, funders, partners, advocates, influencers that are here as we kick off an incredibly important conversation about the future of programs that provide guaranteed income for people in Massachusetts. 1 year ago, in this very space, United Way launched a 7-year strategic plan to advance economic justice in our region. Our new way forward is focused on ensuring access to financial well-being is universal and prosperity is shared across race and ethnicity. Our research shows that more than 200,000 people in our region are living at the federal poverty line, which is why this is an urgent and incredibly important conversation to have today. We should not rest until everyone has access to essential needs such as housing and food, an opportunity to pursue goals such as advancing education or saving for retirement, or even just the basic freedom from the stress that comes with difficulty managing everyday expenses. Today, as part of our new way forward and focus on raising up community-driven solutions while amplifying community voices, we are proud to host this forum. Our new way forward is focused on advancing bold, innovative ways to provide opportunities for upward economic mobility for all members of our community. Guaranteed basic income is not only a proven mechanism for alleviating poverty and improving health outcomes, but it also makes it easier for people to find jobs and take care of their children. In 2020, United Way partnered with the City of Chelsea and the Shaw Family Foundation to launch Chelsea Eats. The evaluation of this program demonstrated the impact of providing unrestricted cash to help people meet essential needs, contributing to the overall national debate about the value of cash for supporting household financial well-being. Guaranteed basic income programs have also underscored the role of public-private partnerships to catalyze and seed new approaches. And that movement continues to grow. Under the leadership of Mayor Ballentine, my hometown, the city of Somerville just announced that they will launch a new program to support 200 households. So what's next for this approach? What does broad implementation look like, and why hasn't it been implemented already? This is the dialogue that we'll have today. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'd like to just recognize a few folks from the public sector who are here today. Christy Ghetto-Young from Senator DiDomenico's office, also a former United Way of Mass Bay team member. We have representatives from the Treasurer's office and from the Department of Transitional Assistance. So, if we're going to get to the kinds of solutions that we need to get to, we need strong public-private partnerships, and we're thrilled to know that there's so many folks from the Commonwealth that are here today to listen, to participate, and to take back some of these ideas to put them into action. And now on to our keynote speaker. And I have the honor and the privilege of introducing a dear, dear friend of mine, Jesús Gerena, the CEO of Up Together. Up Together is a national organization with a bold mission of changing policies, systems, and underlying beliefs so that all people in the United States are seen and invested in for their strengths. A native of Puerto Rico, Jesús moved with his mother and siblings to Amherst, Massachusetts at just 9 years old, and he'll share some of his story with you today of how his life experiences have shaped him. But more important than any of that, at least to me, is that Jesús is a dear friend with whom I've had the pleasure of learning and growing over the last 10 years as part of the Bar Fellowship, and I couldn't be more proud to know him and more proud of him and the important work that he's done to raise the nation's consciousness on issues of poverty and on true community-led transformation and change. He inspires me each and every day, and I feel grateful to be in this work with him and to have him here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesús Gerena.
And good morning, and thank you, Bob, for such a kind introduction. It's great to see everybody and to be in the city this morning with all of you. I did also want to share a special thank you to Bob, who, as he noted, has been a longtime friend. And as he shared, we were connected about a decade ago as part of the Bar Fellowship in 2015. But we got together in 2014 first, so that's why I count a decade, all right? And similar to our family's experience at Up Together, once we connected, we began to meet regularly and haven't stopped since. We've been able to share as we meet regularly in every aspect of our lives and support one another, as well as to share specifically around the passion that we want to be able to bring impact, whether it's to the city of Boston and beyond. And I know I'm not alone as Bob winds down his tenure here at United Way in being eternally grateful for his work and his many contributions to making Boston a better city to live in and every day. Really, thank you so much, Bob. And I know that you'll continue to do that in new ways and can't wait to hear more. So I'm really excited to be back and have this opportunity to share some thoughts to help shape the conversation today. As many of you know, this is where I began my career in social justice work and eventually with Up Together. That was 15 years ago, which feels like a long, long time ago. I had a little less gray hair in my beard. But before that, let me share a little bit of background. After spending the first decade of my career in Boston at the High Squares Task Force, working with youth organizers who were trying to change their lives and their community, I recognized its limits. The work was impactful on an individual basis and inside of our community, yet a more systemic impact was fleeing, and I was hungry for it, and I was looking for ways to be able to grow it. And it was around this time that I met Mauricio Lynn-Miller, the founder of the Family Independence Initiative, FII National, who was in the process of launching this work here in Boston with the generous support of a number of key foundations, as I see Gita at the Boston Foundation at the time, the Bar Foundation, as well as Green Life Fund and EOS Foundation. Now, as I heard him and I had the opportunity to hear him speak, something stuck with me as he shared that all of our solutions to poverty were top-down. We kept coming up with new programs or interventions to fix people or to help them. We kept telling people that they needed what they needed, ignoring the biggest resource that we had, the very people affected. And this resonated with me as an organizer. It pushed my own limits of what I could do to help others, to the very reason why I came to this work in the social sector, to help. And here I heard this man share, right, that the simple understanding that we didn't need to help or come up with solutions to poverty. People had the ability to do it for themselves. What they needed was the resources and opportunities to be able to do so. Now, you can imagine I was hooked, and I applied to become the inaugural director of the Boston site and somehow got the job. Now, we launched in 2010 promoting the tenets of our approach, cash, choice, and community for families. On the cash end, it is what many of us see today as a guaranteed income. At the time, it wasn't easily accepted. When we explained to folks about our work, common questions we kept coming up against was, well, how can you trust people that they'll do the right thing with these dollars? Or when we shared that we weren't a program or a service, the next question would be, then what do you do? Well, what we did was to get out of the way and model the impact of direct investment and the power of community. We began to build the evidence that this worked, that the idea is not new, as guaranteed income was talked about in the 60s by Dr. King as well as the Black Panthers, because they knew that poverty was a policy choice. What was new is that Boston served as the first expansion of this work outside of California. And of course, it led the way. And even though the concept was new, it quickly came into families' radar, and we grew. From our initial 35 families, which started here in Boston, and initially actually just 7 that brought together those 35 families. Through them, through the conversations that they had with one another, we quickly grew to 1,000 strong. And this growth was led by them. They spread the message, and they enrolled others into it. And it was the power of that community that really catalyzed the work of our organization. And even though we were a national organization, I was often invited to participate on a national work. And they kept saying, come on and help us do this across the country. And I would keep coming back and saying, actually, no, Boston needs to be the star of this movement. It can help be the example for others to be able to follow it. And I repeatedly declined that invitation for as long as I could, because I wanted to be able to help grow Boston, for it to be the beacon for others to follow. Now, when I think about those early days in Boston, I never would have imagined that in 2019, we would launch the Trust and Invest initiative, which I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as when COVID hit, that we would be in a position to be able to distribute $130 million to 200,000 households across the country in a 9-month period of time. And as I stand in this room, I can feel that momentum that began to grow even further in 2020 carry on today. And I can think about what can be next. In addition to that, last year, as an organization, we adopted a new strategic plan that positioned us to be a systems change organization. Critical for us is that we don't want to do this in perpetuity. We don't want to have to continue to do demonstrations. What we want to do is partner with key organizations and philanthropy to help shape government and policies to better support our families. Not for the sake of more evidence, because we have enough evidence, but for the sake of being able to position a way to show what the ability of investing in people looks like to shape those policies at the end. So this is a great segue to thinking and talking a little bit about the Trust and Invest initiative, which was a groundbreaking 18-month randomized control trial, or RCT, in Greater Boston, looking at the effect of $500 a month of guaranteed income, as well as the effects of peer groups on financial and social well-being. We were able to enroll 1,500 households altogether, which is one of the largest studies in the country. We were able to partner with the Massachusetts Department of Transitional Assistance, as well as the study completed last year. We had an 87% survey response rate, thanks in part to our family partners and putting families at the center as evaluators. Now, as I mentioned, we already have countless stories of how participation impacted members, and it mirrors what we see around the country over and over again. People tell us that they have more time with their families, their children can enjoy activities, they can buy enough food for their family, they can stabilize their housing, they have less stress in their lives, and more security. UpTogether has invested more than $210 million in individuals and families since 2020 alone. And this data from our work and guaranteed income pilots from across the country shows the same thing again over and over. I'll just keep repeating it. Members use the investments of direct cash over necessities. They invest to reduce stress and support their mental health. They invest in supporting their housing stability. And that direct investment has a lasting effect in the way that they see one another and support one another and strengthen their own community. Right? And just to highlight that point over and over again, we did this in a guaranteed income pilot in Oakland, California. And as people were selected, and they literally won the lottery, right? Like there were over 2,500 individuals who pre-qualified to be able to participate. 300 were selected. And immediately when we asked what would they be doing with the money, the first thing that they talked about was, how do I invest, how do I take this opportunity to invest back in others around me? How do I use these dollars to keep it inside of these very shops and businesses that are supporting me? That is critical for us to be able to succeed, because me alone succeeding is not enough. I want to use this opportunity to help others succeed as well. It's extraordinary to see guaranteed income become mainstream. In 2018, we saw the Mother's Magnolias Trust in Mississippi. In 2019, Mayor Tubbs of Stockton started a guaranteed income there. And in 2020, we even had a presidential candidate talk about universal basic income, right? From those early days of like, what are you going to use this money for? And what do you do? To, no, this is becoming mainstream. People are recognizing that to be able to address poverty in this country, we need to continue to look at and invest in our biggest asset, people. So when 2020 hit and COVID hit, government and philanthropic funders across the country saw cash as necessary. And over again, the results continue to prove, right? The increase of the child tax credit in 2021 by the federal government took 3 million kids out of poverty overnight in July of 2021. The single largest metric move as it relates to poverty in the last 60 years. In December 31st, 2021, we put them back in. Poverty is a policy choice. We are continuously creating these barriers and these challenges to the individuals and the households who suffer financial hardship. And so demonstrations are impactful, yes. And especially to those receiving cash, to build that evidence. They get the benefit of it. But alone, they won't suffice. It's time to move from pilot to permanence. And that's why I'm here today. So Up Together has a simple model: community, capital, and choice. Invest in people directly. Trust them to make their own decisions. Allow them to find their own solutions. Track their social and economic mobility. Learn from their experience. And value their communities. Now that, again, part about community is critical. Relationships are what sustain us, right? They're critical for us in the long term. Cash is great, trust me, I know. And it has an immediate impact, but long term, that community component is what's gonna be able to support us long term. So by investing in individuals and family, we're also investing in their communities and strengthening those ties. We're changing the way we see families experiencing poverty and their communities. We know that people are not to blame for their financial situation. People need direct investment in their own lives. People must have full choice and control over their time and resources. And all these years later, it's amazing that today I get to sit here and share with you all as it's a movement that is growing inside of our city. Oh man, it's no longer my city, but you know what I mean. Which means, right, that we've worked with incredible folks and partners along the way. And thinking again about Geeta, as well as Councillor Siddiqui in Cambridge, who launched Cambridge Rise in 2018. Not only did she help launch Family Independence Initiative in 2010, but also in 2018. And I think as a result of that, of Lita, who is a member of the Cambridge Rise community who received those $500 a month, who not only talks about finally being able to meet her basic needs and not worry about running out of gas on the way to school, or perhaps more importantly, how the cash opened up the space for her to connect with her daughter, her friends, and family. They don't have to worry about those day-to-day making critical decisions to meet basic needs, but also how they can now not only strengthen their ties inside and outside of their household, as well as how to pursue other goals inside of their lives. We're seeing a greater understanding as a result of all of this work that racist and deficit-based policies and practices are responsible for creating the wealth gap and inequalities in our country. We've also provided proof, again, that this works. So imagine what's next. When we gather here again in 10 years, what's possible? And hopefully y'all will invite me back. I know this room is already is ready. Most of you have already been taking action. From the community organizations and leaders, you see the impact of investment, and you feel the impact of our deficit-based system. Please keep advocating, work with us. We need to do this as a joint chorus to be able to continue to grow this work. To our funding partners, we know that you cannot solve this on your own. And we've seen here in Boston and in other cities across the country that philanthropy plays a key role to help government shift And we need both at the table and their investment. So thank you again to the United Way for publicly prioritizing guaranteed income. What would be possible if all funders in Massachusetts did the same? To our government partners, there is no shortage of crisis you are dealing with. And we've seen at the federal level and by some of our neighbors, like in Connecticut, we can simplify and have a greater impact when we enact policies that center the dignity and choice of people, whether it's a guaranteed income, baby bonds, as I mentioned, the child tax credit, or their income tax credit. The time is now. Hopefully we can keep moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for your leadership and for leaving us with a lot to chew on and think about as we dive into our panel today. I particularly love the phrase pilot to permanence. That's the thing that's going to stick with me. I think we have enough proof that this works, and now we need to think about how we build it out and we make it sustainable and make it permanent. So thank you for that. My next role here is to introduce our moderator, who is also someone who needs little introduction to folks in Boston that care about sustainable community change. Our moderator for today's discussion is a true local leader when it comes to economic mobility and reducing income disparities. Gerena Dawu joined the Wu administration as the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion in January of 2022. He's a lifelong resident of Boston who has served in executive level positions for the Boston chapter of the NAACP, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. In his current work, Chief Dawu is focused on making Boston a resilient, economically equitable, and vibrant city that creates opportunities to build generational wealth for all communities. And I can say that I have had the pleasure and honor over these last few years of working with Chief Dawu in a number of circumstances, and our city's economic future is in incredible hands under his leadership. So with that, I welcome Chief Gerena Dawu.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Wonderful. So I'm going to take 2 seconds to go walk to my chair over there. All right. Hello again. All right. All right, there we go. All right. Great to see all of you. So I was told I have 20 minutes to share some thoughts and then invite the panel up, but you all don't look excited by... All right. Well, before I invite my colleagues up here, I'm really excited about this conversation. I actually have the best job today. So for folks in government, there are two great roles when at events like this. One is to either be in the audience or to be the moderator, because in both accounts, you don't have to answer any questions. And so, but first I want to thank Margaret Lowe and WBUR for this space, which has been a really important classroom and community room for the city of Boston. And, you know, want to thank you, Jesus, and Up Together, and Jessica, my sister in life, Jessica, who's been working with Up Together, met in Councilor Presley's office, now Congresswoman Presley. But the work that you've been doing across the country has been nothing short of incredible. And, you know, you have helped to transform this conversation into what it is today, as you laid out. So thank you very much for the leadership that you've provided. And, you know, now that I'm in a public setting, I've said this privately, but Bob, you know, there is a quote I once heard when I was working at City Hall years ago, that some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, and some people ask, what happened? And for many years, not just your role at United Way, but just your career and your life has been a testament and has shown that you are a person and with the team around you that helps to make things happen. So we appreciate all that you've done and look forward to your next steps on the journey. So, as Bob mentioned, my role is to serve as the Chief of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. And if I were here a couple of years ago, I would have said I'm here as the Chief of Economic Development. But my team is not, we're not very creative. And so instead of OED, our acronym now is EIEIO, but it is what it is. But that name was changed for a very real and important reason, and it's what leads me to sit in this seat today and why I agreed to serve as the moderator and not just be in the audience today to listen and learn. When the mayor came into her office in November of 2021, when a lot of people heard the term economic development, they kind of recoiled, because what they saw and felt as economic development were the cranes in the skies and the conversations around gentrification and displacement, the fact that many people who had settled roots here in the city now had to move out of the city because they couldn't afford to live here. And so what the mayor wanted to ensure is that before anyone meets me or anyone on our team, that they know the work that we're doing and who we're doing it for. And she also understood that we cannot at all ever in this city talk about economic opportunity in all of its glory if we are not focused on inclusion and making sure that especially communities that for a long time were not allowed at the table are actually thought of first and have all the seats at the table to enjoy these opportunities. So all that said, I am going to introduce our panelists and just say that at the same time that we're having this conversation, the mayor is actually rolling out our $4.6 billion budget, which I appreciated this point that it's funding is important, but not the only thing that we can focus on. And so a lot of, and Doug will probably laugh at this because I have my talking points for the budget, which you'll hear later today. But the investments that the city is making to be coupled with ideas like this, which are important, whether it's in youth jobs or our schools or raising wages for our lowest paid city employees. And so I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So now that I have taken up my 20 minutes, I am going to welcome up Doug Howgate, the president of the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation. Doug began as president in January of 2023, after 2 years as the foundation's executive vice president. Prior to his time at the foundation, Doug has held a number of policy positions in Massachusetts, serving as senior policy advisor to Senate President Karen Spilka between 2018 and 20, and budget director of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means between 2010 and 2014. Mass Taxpayer Foundation is a public policy organization with a long track record of high-quality research and nonpartisan analysis of state and local fiscal, tax, and economic policies. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thrilled to be here.
Geeta Pradhan, president of the Cambridge Community Foundation. Geeta draws on her deep experience in philanthropy, urban planning, and community development to address the needs of Cambridge. In 2021, Geeta co-authored the Foundation Equity and Innovation Cities Report, highlighting the growing income disparities amidst Cambridge's growing prosperity. She helped envision and structure the city's $22 million Rise Up Cambridge, the only citywide effort to offer a non-lottery cash assistance program, and is leading the research that will help make the case for policy change. Thank you for being here with us. Dr. Megan Sandell, pediatrician, Boston Medical Center, and so many other things. She is the co-director of the Grow Clinic for Children at Boston Medical Center and the principal investigator for the Boston Opportunity System Collaborative, which helps underserved Boston neighborhoods with employment and affordable housing opportunities. She's also the co-lead principal investigator for Children's Health Watch at BMC and the medical center's lead of a $6.5 million housing and place-based community health initiative. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And one of our favorite people as well, Josh Waxman, Chief Operating Officer at Camp Harborview. Josh has over 15 years of experience across the nonprofit and public sectors, dedicating his work to community and driving impact and change. As the Chief Operating Officer at Camp Harborview, Josh has helped lead the organization's evolution from a summer camp into a comprehensive entity that engages with young people and their families through a myriad of support services all year round. And Camp Harborview has spearheaded the most expansive privately funded guaranteed income in the U.S., so we're looking to hear more about that. So thank you all for being here with us this morning. So, as you know, Boston does not have a guaranteed basic income program, but we're still learning and discovering all the tools that are out there. So this is mostly a selfish effort for me to get free advice from all of you. So I want to start off with you, Josh and Geeta. Would love to understand what your biggest successes have been with your programs to date. Why don't we start off with you, Josh, and we'll...
Sure. Thank you, Sagun, and we got you. We're gonna give you all the ammo you need today, I promise. I just want to thank everyone that's in here. The one thing I'll say about this work is that, looking out at the audience, there's a lot of people here who are already doing this work in many ways, and I appreciate how you're investing in people, because that's really what this is about. We launched our work in 2020 after really an immense amount of research, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my friend and brother, Ron Dorsey, who's sitting in the back there, who really helped spearhead this work at Camp Harborview. Focus groups and surveys, and what we heard time and time again from families that we work with was too much red tape, not enough choice. This stuff isn't rocket science. And so we launched our program in 2020. We just finished a 2-year pilot, funding 50 families at about $600 a month. And I want to be clear about our program. We chose to focus on families that sort of fall just above that benefits cliff, which I'm sure others will talk about today. Our theory of action was really around, could a guaranteed income for a small period of time be an accelerator for families into the middle class? Simple as that. And I'm proud to say that it certainly has been for many families. No surprise. Clap it up for families, not for me. What I'll say is this, the sort of 2 or 3, I look at this quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively is this, a 26% reduction in psychological distress for the families that received the money. We had a control group that did not receive the payments that we also studied. They had a 15% increase in psychological distress during the same time period. No surprise. On the financial side of things, we saw a 26% increase in asset building for families that received the money. We saw a 14% decrease for families not receiving the money. So when I think about the quantitative stuff, no surprise, extra cash goes a long way. The second thing I'll say, and this is more about organizational design, is it's fundamentally shifted the DNA of how we do our work. Me, the white guy on this stage, isn't proximate to the families that I serve every day. Just true. I'm going to name it. But when I ask them what they need and they say cash, what I do know is this, and we learn this, 100% of the time, not 95, not 98, they're going to make the right choice to move their families forward, and it's going to be probably better than any intervention that I could have dreamed up with my colleagues in some room. And so the learnings and the successes for us have been around when you invest in people, when you believe in agency, time and time again that it's going to work.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I have to start by admitting that, like Jesus, I'm also a Mauricio Lim-Miller junkie. And have been in this space, and I remember taking Family Independence Initiative program to the Boston Foundation board and getting turned down in my first try. And then I had to go back and I had to figure out how to talk about it in a way that people could figure out and connect with it. It was so ahead of its times. And Jesus, thank you so much for all that you're doing for everyone in this country. So it's really delightful to see the advancement. I felt like you actually spoke about everything that the panel was going to talk about. So I think thank you for that too, because it gives us the opportunity to actually have a deeper conversation about things that maybe we weren't planning to talk about. It's been an amazing experience to work on this issue in Cambridge, starting with 130 single-family household pilots that we did. in a phenomenal collaboration that was philanthropy with the public sector and the nonprofit sector. And I know Tina Alu from COEC is in the crowd. And oh God, why am I blanking out? Sumbul Siddiqui, who was the mayor then, actually is celebrating Eid. So to all of our Muslim friends and neighbors, happy Eid. She will not be able to join us today. But it was this amazing collaboration. And I think what I learned, the one thing that I learned from this collaboration was that it takes more than one sector to solve these problems. We had to actually get together. It was philanthropic funds. It was Sumbul working with the state agencies, DTA and HUD and others to get benefit waivers. It was Tina who had the relationships on the ground and the trust of families that enabled us to put together a pilot. I think the results from our pilot are very similar to the results that Josh talked about, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I think when I think about the success of that, we actually did not have the results of the pilot out when we launched the expansion, which went from 130 families that were chosen by lottery to a citywide, I think it's the only citywide program in the country, where everyone who was eligible would get in. So long as you met the eligibility criteria, you were in for 1,923 families. And we are also doing an evaluation of that with MDRC and my colleague, two of my colleagues, Alison, who also worked for the United Way. Everyone seems to have worked for the United Way. What happened to me? And Kerry Nicole Dillman, a researcher, have actually been taking the lead on that research work that we are doing. So I think I would say that for us, probably one of the biggest learnings was that to solve complex problems in the community, you need cross-sector approaches. The joy was in going from 130 to almost 2,000 families, and the opportunity is with the fact that we are doing research that is based on understanding narratives and focusing on narrative shifts that I hope will power the work that United Way and others who are working in the policy field are doing to be able to shift policy. Because without that policy shift, guaranteed income, a phenomenal opportunity, a phenomenally successful program, I don't think can be scaled. So I'll leave it at that.
I actually want to build on this last point here. You talked about the narrative shift. And I'll open this to everyone on the panel, not all of you to answer, but a couple of you. But how do we address the narrative here? I mean, I'll just say actually, Jesus mentioned this in his remarks about, Dr. King talked about this back in, there's a speech that King gave in '67 called Where Do We Go From Here?, where he goes through all the ills of the country and lands on, we need to do a guaranteed national income here in the country, but it was met with ridicule by a whole lot of people at that time. Today, when you talk about guaranteed income and really any program that helps, low-income families, there seems to just be this hatred of poor people, period. So as you're developing these programs, how do you address that narrative shift to garner the support to help make these programs possible?
So thank you so much. I think in a lot of ways, Geeta made this point actually in another meeting we were in last week, is this idea of linking income with assets and ownership. That as we think about changing lanes over a lifetime, I think we have to really get over this idea of it's not like we can solve poverty, or it's not like we can do this, or you can't boil the ocean. And if my colleague, Dr. Thea James, was here, our Vice President of Mission, she would call out, well, then what are we doing? We have to be able to get over this idea that poverty is somehow something that we just have to accept. And I think there are ways in which we can really start to connect these dots. I think sometimes people will ask a question, why is a health system talking about economic mobility? And what I will tell you is that it is the root cause of, honestly, mortality. So the Boston Public Health Commission linked the mortality gap between Nubian Square, 69 years life expectancy, and the Back Bay, which is 92 years. So 23-year gap. And then fundamentally, you look at the area median income. In that neighborhood of Roxbury, it's $44,000. In the Back Bay, it's $140,000. And so fundamentally, I think we have to start to be able to talk about the continuum. We have to be able to talk about this ecosystem because people's lives depend on it, and we can do it differently. And I think our ability to talk about this ecosystem is, and that it frankly is what we all would want for ourselves, that we can be able to do it differently instead of it being like, well, are they going to do the right thing with the money? Are they going to know what to do? Did they work hard enough? And I think we just have to talk about it as that we all benefit when people live longer and have the ability and the resources to thrive.
One thing I would add, just from a perspective as a policy staff for a long period of time, a commonality I noticed in a lot of really good policy proposals, policy outcomes that was out there is you have a great conversation that's going on that's based in research, that's based on efficacy, things that work, and that conversation takes place over here. And then you have policy staff and policymakers who are over here. And I think in both cases, there's this huge bridging that needs to happen, right? And the analogy I always think of is like this policy conversation is like a train, right? That this train's moving. We've got the evidence. We think it works. We know it works. We know that this works well. Why aren't people getting on this train? Well, if you're not moving at the same speed as the train, it's incredibly disruptive to try to get on that train, right? And I think sometimes there's this big disconnect of just assuming that if you're on Beacon Hill, that people are looking at the same trade-offs you're looking at. You come at it from the perspective that this is going to be $9 billion. We don't have the resources. You kind of imbue your perspective with the idea of the worst case of what this would be. But I also think that from an advocacy or from a building support perspective, sometimes it similarly can be, well, why aren't people already moving as fast as we are on this? And part of it is because they've been working on other things. They've been doing other things. And so how do we kind of build some of those bridges sometimes in terms of helping people to get on a policy train? I think of early education in recent years as a good example. And there's kind of a couple things that need to happen, right? That's not to say that we've solved early education by any means in Massachusetts, but you have seen state spending on early education double in the last 5 years. So why did that happen? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, some good and some bad, but one is part of the kind of the evidence. We know that this works. We know this is helpful to the economy, to families, to children. That's got to happen. It's also got to be the right policy moment, right? There was federal funds that then bridged into state funding that allowed some significant new investments. But it's also that kind of bridging communication that takes place in the meantime, where it was, I think, a lot of conversations that had taken place within the early education field, figuring out how to talk at the policy level and being proactive with saying, hey, you're going to be concerned that this is too expensive. Here's how we would make it modular. Here's how we're going to address that. Here's how we know what your concerns are going to be, or at least we think we know what some of them can be. And we've thought about them too. We may not agree with them, but here's how we kind of respond to those concerns. And I think some of that architecture, which is happening here already, but it's really important to kind of help people get on some of those trains.
Well, since you brought it up, though, and as someone representing the Mass Taxpayer Foundation, like, what is the role of tax policy in this conversation? And, I guess a little free advice on how advocates shape the narrative to match, to make sure that people see this as something that's necessary for them to think about and move forward on.
So tax policy is a huge part of how we provide assistance to everyone in the Commonwealth, whether they're low income, whether they're wealthy, right? We use billions of dollars in tax policy to shape a number of public policy outcomes, including in recent years, the biggest increases we've seen in support for low-income families have really, at the state level, have been through the state tax code, right? Moving the EITC match, the Earned Income Tax Credit match, from 15% of the federal level to 40% of the federal level. When you looked at the increase in the child-dependent tax deduction in Massachusetts, though that's not kind of income qualified, that was absolutely kind of, I think, the impetus behind that. And between those two things, you're talking about $800 million every year that is used in the tax code to support people with dependent children, people who qualify for the EITC. So tax policy can absolutely be a way to effectuate and expand effective policy. I think EITC provides a good example, right? Kind of why has that been able to treble in size in Massachusetts over the last 8 years or so? One, I think over time, people understood and believed in the model, that this was a model that was going to work, that people had buy-in to, right? So, and that takes a while. And then two, I think this idea that it could be a little modular, right? We went from 15 to 20 to 30 to 40. I know that people absolutely want to, in whatever policy arena you're in, get from here to there and just do it because it's the right thing to do and we know it would work. And the reality is there needs to be a modular option, right? How do we get from here to here to here to here? And one I think the really interesting things we're going to talk about and have talked about up here, the role of philanthropy, right? The role of public-private partnerships to demonstrate to policymakers that don't worry, you don't have to do it all right now, but look at what some of these folks are doing, where it works, and how it might be able to move from there, not so it's necessarily going everywhere tomorrow, but that there's a step after that that you can get more buy-in to.
Yeah, I want to jump in on this because I do think that this idea of like tax credits are evidence-based policies. I want to give a shout out to some colleagues in the audience, Dr. Stephanie Edner-DeCuba, who's the Executive Director of Children's Health Watch, research professor at BU School of Public Health, and Rich Shord, who's a Director of System Implementation Strategies. I think this is really important around reframing tax credits as healthy families tax credits. What I remember testifying in 2015 and talking about the fact that research showed that an extra $1,000 from the earned income tax credit resulted in 8% lower low birth weight, and in low poverty neighborhoods, a 15% reduction in low birth weight. And I told policymakers if that was a pill, it would be on every pharmacy in this country. But it's not, it's a tax credit. And so what was great when I came back the next year, because they didn't increase the earned tax credit, what they said, well, you know, Dr. Sandel, it is a healthy families tax credit. And I said, you're right, like Congressman or Senator. But it is this idea of like, how do we reframe the research? And I do think the good news is that we have great research from earned income tax credit and child tax credit. Jesus referenced it. We have studied what happens when you actually give it and you take it away. Right? And so there are ways in which not only that it works for health, money works, right? That's the first lesson. The second lesson is that it's dignified. People get it and they don't have to apply for it and go through all of that red tape. And that's really important. The third one is that it was supplemental. It wasn't taking away from other benefits. The cliff effect is important and we need to solve for it. And the fourth thing that I think is important, and we've seen this over in our research and in the research that Jason and Geeta did, is this idea of honestly, it helps people lift their horizon. And so as we think about it, money works, it's dignified, it needs to be supplemental. You can't lose other things for it to work. And it really helps you raise your horizons. And those are the things that I think that we have to keep in mind as we think about scaling. We have the data, we've done the programs, we're at the policy level conversation of how we scale this.
I actually want to bring up another aspect of the narrative change issue. When we give people with wealth or people with assets a mortgage interest deduction, it is an incentive. When we give someone what we call public benefits, it's a benefit. It is charity. It is you're helping others. That this myth that this American myth that if you work hard enough and you pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, you will succeed is a real myth. I mean, in my work, I would say I'm aging myself. 30 years of work on this issue in community development in Boston, in the Boston area, I would say now. I have not come across families or people who work harder than our lowest income households. And we need to change that. I think we need to lift up the resilience. We need to show that, they stretch their dollar to the ultimate limit. I don't know anyone else who could do that. And so we have to change this thinking about how we look at the issue of poverty policy, as well as people who live in poverty.
Yeah, one thing I think I would add, you asked about sort of narrative change. Our initiative was sort of entirely privately funded, frankly, from a few individuals, philanthropists. I think what I will say is I think part of this, the elephant in the room, is this is a bit of hand-to-hand combat. You have to get in the room with people, work on the narrative change that Up Together is so valiantly doing, and kind of put it in people's faces, right? They want to see the return on the investment, right? And as much as we love our friends in government, we know that there's not as much faith as there probably has been over the course of history in what's happening in government, what's happening with tax dollars, right? And so if I can say, for your $500,000 investment, 6 people are going to buy a home, 30% of people are going to quit their second or third job simply with a $600 investment a month. That's a powerful narrative that can act quickly and urgently and innovatively to help solve problems. And I think that really resonates with those philanthropists who we know are people with power and with money and who have influence on places like Beacon Hill and in Washington. And I think it's how do you shift their narrative that the bootstrap is frankly BS, as we know, to then arm them with the tools to have those conversations with their policymakers in the places that they go.
So my one goal was to not make news today, and I'm not going to do that myself. But I do, and before I ask this question, I'm just, in the next 5 or 6 minutes or so, I'm going to come to the audience for questions. So please start thinking about what questions you want to ask, and we'll start coming to you. But again, for some free advice here. So you mentioned the role of government. I guess how much of this needs to come top down in terms of federal support, state, and then local, and then everybody, whether they're saying it out loud, they're certainly screaming in their heads and their hearts about this coming November, and what it could mean, and whatever your political persuasion is. Based on what happens in November, what are your concerns, or what are you looking forward to? And, in a place like Boston or Cambridge or Chelsea, here in the Commonwealth, if there's a change in who is in leadership in DC, what is the impact here on this conversation, and really across the country? But what is the impact? What should we be thinking about in Boston, or Mayor Siddiqui and others, and how we approach this conversation?
I would say that you actually have to work bottom up, top down, all around. There isn't an option. I mean, if we think about the fact that when we make these choices that are upstream choices, when you're giving people that guaranteed basic income, it prevents homelessness. Mm-hmm. The cost of homelessness, we all know, is financially, socially, emotionally, economically, the biggest spiral down for a family, a community, and I think this country, in fact. The amount of money that we spend on after-the-fact kind of services is ridiculous. What I'm hoping we can turn the narrative into is shift the investment up front. Invest in children, invest in families, prevention rather than cure. And I would say that I think it's really important. And for me personally, what it does is if there is change, it's going to make my conviction about this even stronger. Because we need that. It's people like us in this room and those who we work with who are going to have to really dig our heels in and make sure that we don't let this go. Yeah. I think we're in a very good moment, and we need to capitalize on this.
I'll jump in that I think, Shagun, you mentioned we at BMC have been proud to be the backbone organization of a Boston Opportunity System, or BOSS Collaborative. And what we understand is kind of this phrase that many people have heard is that talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And we know that many of the neighborhoods in particularly Boston that have been historically disinvested in, that the red line maps from a century ago continue with this persistent economic distress. And so what are we doing to build those public-private partnerships, cross-sector partnerships, health systems? We are anchor institutions. Boston Medical Center is not moving its corporate headquarters. We've been here for 150 years. We're going to be here for 150 more. What's our interest in helping build opportunity ecosystems? And so we've been really focused on concepts of ownership, making sure that not only can we invest in an amazing halal grocery store, cafe, and market, Nubian markets, that honestly no bank would fund, but we as a hospital, and we heard it from the urban planning, they said, I want a Trader Joe's. And we were like, great, who's gonna fund that? Okay, we're gonna help fund it. But really making sure that those owners own that commercial real estate. And the city is leading in building out a commercial owner real estate fund. I want to tell just one story because I think this idea of like, there's no single answer here and how we build ecosystems. So I learned from my patients. I did not grow up in poverty. I am not poor, but I listened. My patients are my best teachers. And so I I take care of kids that are weight faltering. They're not growing on the growth curve. And so I asked one of my favorite patients what was stressing her out. And she talked about that she had an opportunity to move out of public housing, to convert her public housing unit to a Section 8 voucher and buy a home in the city of Boston, an amazing program that was set up. And she had fallen behind during the pandemic, her husband and she, and so she was $3,000 short. And if she didn't get caught up, she was going to miss out on this opportunity to buy her home. And we at Boston Medical Center, through our donors, had a housing emergency fund. And I was like, this is an emergency. We need to get you caught up. So for $3,000, we were able to help her so that she could buy her home in Mattapan. She now is part of the pre-licensing cohort that United Way is offering because she wants to open a family childcare center in the home that she owns. And she's dreaming about what her kids are going to be able to do. And so those moments, you should not rely on me as a pediatrician asking a question to find that. We need every opportunity to build that ecosystem so that $3,000 can change someone's course over a lifetime.
You mentioned Shagun. I think I would just add to what Dr. Sandell said. What should we do between now and the election? Maybe buy some real estate in a different country if it goes a certain way. But not to make this political. But I do think this is a moment for philanthropy. You know, a quick Google last night, billions of dollars in philanthropic dollars flow through this city each year. Billions. Give me a fraction of that and have it be cash to families. You probably eliminate poverty in this city in a year. And so I think it's that kind of big thinking that philanthropy has a critical role to play in, that can support guys like Doug who believe in the policy but don't know how to make it happen quite yet from a fiscal perspective in government. I think if we put the voices of families first, if philanthropy shifts from a model of prescription to empowerment, you're going to start to see the needle move pretty significantly between now and the election.
And the one thing I'd add to this, which I think comes back to the point I made earlier, is as we're having all these conversations about why this is so impactful, why this works, it's also important at the same time to think about, so what are the challenges that are preventing this from happening, aside from people don't understand the program or biases or inherent racism. And one of them is getting to exactly to Gita's point, which is the way the city budgets, the way the state budgets, the way that most of us budget probably personally, doesn't lend itself to long-term investments. The nature of year-to-year budgeting, where you are limited to the resources you collect in a year. I don't care what tax code you have, you are likely not going to have the resources this year to do the things that we probably know in our heart are going to have a long-term impact. That's a real issue. And if you're you're Mayor Wu putting out your budget today, if you're the House putting out their budget today, you've got to live within your resources, and you've got to live within the larger fiscal landscape in which we reside, and that's outside of your control as well. Those are real constraints. Okay, does that mean we can't do anything ever? No, but what it does mean is we have to think creatively about how we tackle some of those challenges. And I think over time, there have been some interesting examples in Massachusetts. I think back to the social innovation financing movement of about 10 years ago, which was partnerships between the finance sector, philanthropy, and the state. How do we try to quantify savings going forward? How do we make investments now where the state can get some money up front from others to then be paid back with returns over time? And I know that at a certain point you want to say, but that doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do. We should just do it. But when you have to put out a balanced budget and get the city council to vote on it, get the state to go vote on it, and get the residents to say, okay, that seems like a legitimate use of public resources, thinking through some of those challenges, or at least being a willing partner in how to think of those things, if that doesn't happen, you're never going to have a level of scale you want to have, because there's going to be that immovable object to say, hey, we'd love to do this. We know that if we did this today, it's going to return to us fivefold in 5 years. But the reality is this is what we have, and these are the kind of incentives we have. And so I think working together to think with policymakers about those longer-term creative solutions to those types of challenges, which are not new for government, has got to be a part of this conversation over and above kind of this specific policy.
Can I add one little thing that your thoughts stirred for me, which was I've been having a conversation with Cambridge City councillors as they're looking at their term. And affordable housing, of course, is on top of everyone's minds. And we were talking about the fact that building one unit of affordable housing in the Boston area now costs between $600,000 to $800,000 because of the complexity of how we do our work. But if you were to not build 2 units and have $1.5 million available for preventing homelessness, actually it has such amazing returns. So I don't think it's an either or issue. I think it could be a little bit of both, and it's a shifting from where we are to another place, and understanding the long-term impacts of some of these decisions where people are living in poverty, people are getting stressed out. I mean, all the things that Megan talked about, all of the impacts that it has and the ripple effects it has, both in a positive and a negative way. And so my hope is that we can start to shift the conversation a little, not jump. I think you talked earlier, Doug, about the fact that, you like the EITC, increasing it over time, a little more progress over time. We cannot have huge shifts, but let's at least start to make those little strides towards the future.
That's great. Well, building on what Josh said about philanthropy, we're going to block the doors because I see some foundations represented here today. So we might
still love you guys, I promise.
So I want to, I can ask a bunch more questions, but want to open this up to the audience in case there are a couple of hands, some brewing. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call you out. Questions, no speeches. All right. We just want to get to the root of it and have our folks answer. So I think someone's coming around with the microphone, and I'll kind of work row by row. So I saw a question here, and this gentleman in the blue shirt, and then we'll start, and then we'll come here, and then we'll move there from there. So question right up here on the front row, or second row.
Hi, I'm Debbie Wynn, the Executive Director of the Our Scholars Program. So I think someone mentioned the cliff effect of benefits, and so I'm now thinking, how do we ensure that there is no cliff effect of guaranteed income programs? So how do y'all think about or talk about the duration of your guaranteed income programs to families or to funders? And then how do you negotiate against a potential cliff effect if the funding goes away or families are no longer eligible for the program?
I would say cliff effects is probably the most critical issue to consider if you're thinking about guaranteed basic income, because it's not about the cash, it's about cash plus the benefits. Families cannot weather a life without having the benefits because the value of the benefits is so great. I mean, we actually had to work with the state to get waivers for every family and do benefits counseling that Tina Lu's group CEOC did with every family to make sure that they were not losing their benefits. That is, that's the thing that gives me pause about guaranteed basic income, because it means that you have to actually either get the waivers or you have to shift policy, which is a much longer game.
Can I ask just, how many people know what cliff effect is? Raise hands. Okay, most people. No, not everyone does, right? This idea, some people are shocked. So again, Dr. Thea James is on the Black Economic Mobility Council that the governor put together, and she tells a story that she started talking about the cliff effect, and people asked what it was. So I do think it's really important to understand how much we make people who are lower income go through hoops. We make them recertify. We pay a lot of money to catch the very, very small percentage of people who happen to not be eligible. And we should ask ourselves, that's a policy decision that we make to spend all that money to, God forbid, somebody get an extra $10 on their SNAP. Okay? So that's the first question I just wanted to push on. I do think Geeta's point, so we have a tax code that has solved this, because earned income tax credit does have a slope to it. And frankly, if we're talking about just a guaranteed income, the child tax credit worked really well, guys. So I do think, I don't know, Josh, what the lawyer bill for the waivers that you had to do for it, or other things. Like I do think that we're at the policy stage of this. How do we scale it? We know it works. The programs have been successful. So if we're at the policy stage, how do we do a campaign to be able to make it a reality over time? And let's think of the best vehicles to do it, so we're not putting it on the family to solve it. There is a cliff effect pilot. I just want to give a shout out. The Economic Development Bill last cycle did do a pilot, and we are, Springfield Works is leading it, but it's going to be a really interesting thing. But again, the amount of effort that's going into calculation right now, so let's just ask ourselves, maybe it's better to just think about scale instead of thinking about making sure we're getting to the dollar of replacement.
And the one thing I would just add to what's been said, I totally agree, is our program is sort of an example of the power of that cliff effect, right? And this was not certainly a desire of the organization not to serve sort of the lowest income people, but we consciously chose not to do that, because what I would call attention to is there really is a forgotten middle in Boston. Families that are working 2 or 3 jobs, missing homework time with their kids, that are barely making ends meet. And so our investment in them has proven to be a rapid accelerator, a very high return on investment. So when you think about making these investments in people, there is that forgotten middle that's quite large in our city, that could make a real difference for those families as well.
Can I just want to jump in very quickly, because I think that question of kind of oversight, accountability, program integrity is the term that's often used, is a really important thing to talk about for a second. We just did a report about a year ago on childcare, where we talked about a lot of the eligibility criteria that are in place for subsidized childcare financial assistance, and that they were designed about 20 years ago, and really, for a variety of reasons, aren't effective in terms of kind of prioritizing the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars, and certainly aren't effective in terms of promoting access. But as you think about expanding a program like this, know that the folks you're going to have to convince are going to want to make sure these resources are spent appropriately. Know that, right? And the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate that this is how that's going to happen. And that's where I do think the tax code comes into it. Tax code knows how much you make, right? The tax code knows all those things. But in some of those conversations that I've been a part of, and I always find it fascinating, what do you want to do in any program? You want to maximize the appropriate access to that program. Now, you may want to define appropriate access very broadly, right? But making sure that kind of that's something that you lead with about, and we're going to do that by doing it this way, in a way that's maximizing access, in a way that's efficient, in a way that, but know that a lot of the folks who aren't on that train I talked about before, that's going to be one of their first questions, right? And so I think figuring out how to talk about it in a way that gets to that, in a way that also maximizes appropriate access, that's got to be the combination, because otherwise that's where you get that disconnect, I think, in communication.
Hi, Alexis Porras. I'm just a United Way donor. As you scale up, I think one of the things that will happen is you'll start to see macroeconomics impact, because when you're doing things at a small scale, you're not really moving the needle across the entire region. But how do you make sure that as you scale up, say for example in Cambridge, that you don't enable vast increases in rents as people who, because people will try and make money from, because you're injecting more income, people will say, oh, I can raise the rent for these neighborhoods and make the affordable housing problem even worse. And I think these kinds of impacts are going to become much bigger as you scale up and you start to move the needle across a whole neighborhood where higher income then drives greater prices. And we saw an example of that where the increased cash in people's during the pandemic, when people had more cash, they started spending more, and we saw a huge bump in inflation nationwide. So, how do you make sure that you don't cause some of these problems as you scale up? So.
I mean, I think the first thing that I will say is that when you look at families that are getting this so-called benefit, I'll give you the example of Cambridge. In the expansion that we've done, the eligibility was for families earning up to 250% of the federal poverty line. That's to $75,000 for a family of 4 in 2023. And the cost of living in Cambridge for a family that size is over 130,000. So the families that are getting this benefit, and in fact, when we did the pilot, it was families in deep poverty. Their average household income was 23,000. So there's a big gap between what federal poverty standard, like in Cambridge, to be able to live in Cambridge and meet all your expenses, you need to earn at 500% of the federal poverty line. So even the expansion of this program was only getting to families that were halfway there. And this speaks to those that lost middle that Josh talked about, who don't get any benefits. So, I think where maybe city policies have to sort of take a look at, rent stabilization ideas and stuff like that. But I think people are not even, if you think of it, 30,000 for a family of 4, that was 2023 standards, and I think it's a little over 31,200 now. 30% of your income is supposed to go for food, 30% for housing, 30% for childcare, and you're left with 10% for food, medical, transportation, clothing, every other need that you have, leave alone investing in yourself or your children. So there is something really fundamentally wrong with the standards that have been set at the federal level that need to actually shift. And I think there is an education that needs to happen in our communities about what people are dealing with in their lives. This high cost of living in the greater Boston area. We're probably Massachusetts, one of the most expensive states to live in at this point. So, I don't know whether that's an answer to your question, but that's what stirred up in my mind.
No, I think it's spot on in the sense of thinking about the real cost of living and other things. The other piece is, again, I'm coming back to the point you made last week, is around income and asset building are not ors. They should be ands. And so the ability to focus on ownership, to be able to look at how does the dollar that you're putting in people's pockets stay in community and become that ripple effect. So there's a lot of good research that if you support sometimes say an employee who is Black or a Black business, that dollar only stays in the Black community for 8 minutes, whereas it stays in the white community in perpetuity. So what are the ways in which the dollar is not singular, but the dollar has that ripple effect? Because I think that our goal would be to be able to use the income in ways to then be able to help people to have that $400 for an emergency, which is a huge metric, to then being more financially resilient and then being able to build an asset. It could be a home, it could be a business, it could be an equity share, it could be a worker cooperative, it could be a small childcare business. What are the ways in which we are helping you change your economic lane? And I think that's how you offset some of that.
I think the last thing I'll say quickly is I think Boston, as we know, is a bit of an analysis paralysis town. We need a task force to study the task force,
totally,
to work in the focus group.
And let's prepare for it.
And I know we've all been a part of those groups. I think what you're seeing across the country is they're just going at it. And I think what you're not seeing, sort of answer your question, the macro economy isn't really changing significantly in cities like Austin or San Antonio. The cost of living was already so high, so why not just try it? And I hope that is a place where our city can sort of get to in the coming months and years.
So I saw right here a question, and then I know there are a couple more hands, but before I get to the two of you, are there any questions on this side? I don't want to lean heavy here, but I just want to scan. It's all right. You don't feel pressured. All right. I see one question here. All right. And then I'll come to the two, and then we got to close it. I actually think I'm over my time, but I have the microphone, so we'll keep going. All right. We'll come right here.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Renee Omalade. My question, Hey Shagun, what's up? I have two questions. So one is, what is the role, or what do you see the role of the education sector in this guaranteed basic income policy, whether it's how do they engage families, but also how are we thinking about our young adults who are in the education sector? I know a lot of this has been centered on families, but have any of the studies you all have done supported some single young people in the guaranteed basic income?
I mean, I know there is one effort that was funded by GMA Foundations, and Prentice Zinn is here. There he is, somewhere. I know he's around. Oh, there, right here. That is focused on 18 to 35-year-olds. So there are some efforts that are happening, and there's another one happening by Bay Cash that is looking at homeless youth. So there are some efforts ongoing in this area. But I think financial education is what I would say. We need to start that with young kids early on.
Yeah, I would just say, I feel like there should be no wrong door, right? If a family needs help with this and other things, because it's more than just cash, as Jesus talked about it, there is this social network building component. I think that for us, we have started holistically, this is the work of Dr. Lucy Marcel in a program called Street Cred, where we started doing free tax prep to make sure people got their taxes. And now we're focused on an economic bundle. You've had a baby. Did you know that there's a state Family Medical Leave Act? We're finding over 90% of our moms don't know and are missing out on that income. And then being able to make sure you're getting all your benefits. And now we're really thinking about how do we have a workforce, a community wellness advocate that follows you from prenatal through the first year of life to make sure that during this time period, you get the 529 set up, you get the baby bond, you're starting that saving and other things. And I think the key is it's not just financial navigation, it's not just having the knowledge, but it also is getting you to that higher paying job or an income that you have more money to actually work with. It's like teaching someone to cook and then not giving them food. So let's figure that out. And I think it could work at schools. I think it could, like, where is that network? Where is that? And we do our financial coaching in cohorts. We put 10 to 12 families together because they can learn from each other. And that network building, we think, is part of the secret sauce in social support.
The one thing I would quickly I know Shagun's over time, but I'd bring us back to is that this is not a knock on financial literacy. I think it's necessary. I think, again, we learned through our pilot that families are going to make the right choice. They're going to make the right investment. They're going to pay the right bills. They're going to do what's right to move their families forward. So I think part of that is also dispelling this myth that we need to have these sort of widespread efforts to tell people how to spend their money. So part of it's dismantling that narrative that we have to have widespread financial education. I don't know that that's exactly true. I think I would give a shout out to my colleague Sam Zito, who's leading mobility mentoring for our families. Totally optional for the family. That's a simple conversation on how do we help you set some goals. I would give credit to Empath on that too. But I think part of it's that narrative shift that we need to tell people. Maybe we don't.
I'll just say the last thing. We found trauma-informed. Like, we start with, like, what's your first memory of money and who controlled money? We don't start with the budgeting tool. And so just because I think there is a lot of trauma with the current systems, and we think that being able to integrate mental health into it is important.
And I'll just say the role of government is to make sure we're properly investing in our schools and our young people. And if you visit boston.gov/budget,
yeah,
you'll be able to see how Mayor Wu is making those investments. All right. So here's what I'm gonna do, because I know I said I have the microphone, but actually they're gonna shut it off. So what I'm gonna do, I forgot they have that power. So I'm gonna have you just say your question. I'm gonna come to you, and then I saw 2 questions here. I'm gonna write them down, and I'm gonna open it to the panel. And like I said, no speeches in search of a question. All right, there you go.
Jason Andrade with Compass Working Capital. Really appreciate a lot of this conversation. Recently, we were at the Hill to support additional funding for FSS. A lot of what Howie mentioned about getting people on the train in the disconnect, it was clear, I think, to me, that there's a clear disconnect between policymakers and some staff, and how a lot of these programs and system change can really help to benefit families. What can we do individually as organizations and across this network to get more of the policymakers and decision makers to better understand these programs and their impact, so that they are thinking in the beginning of the budget process and throughout it about how we can fund these programs on the long term?
Okay, I'm gonna come right here, and then last question back there.
Hi, Christy Ghetto-Young. I work for Senator Sal DiDomenico. This is more a solicitation. This is appropriate of what Josh was saying. We're, along with Representative Marjorie Decker, we're convening a policy commission because we It was passed several years ago. We're finally getting it up and running. It's a lot of exactly what Doug was saying. You have a bunch of staffers like me. We know a lot about the issue. We're not experts, and we have no money. So with all the funders here, please feel free. We want an organization to help us write this. We can't have them work for free. And we also need the expertise. And when everyone raised their hand when Megan asked about cliff effects, I thought these are my people. So I don't want it to be a report with 50 recommendations, all of which of things that we know what works. Expand this, do more of this. I would love it to be bold. I know the senator and the representative would. So for folks who are interested, please contact me and look for an email, because I really do need to solicit folks, and I'd love to get the word out there and love to really start talking about bringing things to scale and changing the system a little bit.
Thank you. And this young man in the back.
Melvin Charles Oguru, FSS Financial Coach at Lynn Housing Authority and Neighborhood Development. Thank you. My question was, what action is the Black Economic Mobility Group taking to mobilize, organize, and assist in creating financial sufficiency solutions for Black residents in Boston, as Blacks are 22.5% of the Boston population? That's my question.
All right. Thank you. All right. So we have these three questions. I'll repeat them back to you just so you remember. Our first question was just about what's being seen as a disconnect between policymakers and advocates on some of these issues, and so how do we help them better understand the importance of these policy items we're talking about. There's a request to, I think we'll just send all the emails and numbers, and Senator DiDomenico will get all of that information. We're happy to work with you. And then this last question, what is the Black Economic Mobility Group doing for Black residents in Boston, essentially? So we'll start, Doug, and then we'll work down.
Yeah, I'll address the first question. So, and there's no one right answer to that, but one thing I would suggest there is reaching out to members and staff. And to me, you need to describe the issue that we're trying to, what do you want to do? You want to help communities be more successful. You want to improve economic access. You want to help families who are struggling to have economic opportunity. Here is this thing that we do right now that you may not know a lot about. And then here's modular, here's how it's currently supported by the state, and here's what a few next steps could look like. And then the other thing to keep in mind is and here's what you're going to think. You're going to think it's too expensive. You're going to think it's not going to work. You're going to think we don't do that. We've never done that. And here's what I would say to those things. And it's not going to be a light bulb moment in every meeting, but I will tell you, especially working in the Ways and Means committees, which are the budget writing committees in the State House, you want those meetings, right? You're looking for ideas. You're looking for things to say, you know what? I don't know a lot about this stuff. The one analogy, the one other example I would give is, so say we were to do this in the state budget this year, right? It would be a line item in the state budget. There are 700 line items in the state budget, right? And so as you're a staffer at Ways and Means, you're looking at all 700 of those line items, and you're looking at 1,000 different revenue codes. And so it's really the onus is on the person, the individual, the group to say, I know there's a lot of line items. I know there's a lot of stuff you want to do, but I know you care about this thing, and here's how this thing works, and here's what I know you're going to say why you can't do it, and here's some options you have. To me, that's kind of the 1, 2, 3. It's not like you're going to bat 1,000 every time, but people want to hear that. People want to know, and don't go in with the assumption that they are going to start from a place of they don't want to do this. It's that they're going to wonder how it's possible and how they can do it, right? And so that would be my advice on that.
So I have much more of a grassroots advice for you. And I tried this several years ago when I worked with the Menino administration. There was a lot of problems with the public schoolyards. And we started a schoolyard initiative where we had hundreds of parents actually send in a little postcard to the mayor to say that the schoolyards were terrible and our children didn't have places to play and learn. And it resulted in a schoolyards initiative. The city ended up spending about $60 million on redoing all the schoolyards in the in the Boston public schools. And I think, having families write to the policymakers, just give them a little postcard, just pepper them with that kind of thing. They love to hear from their constituents about something that is working. It's a way of educating them. So, using some of these grassroots techniques, I think, can be really successful because, and I think the other thing is, like lifting up someone and making them the hero. You're the poster child for this, a policymaker who may have benefited from it. Sumbul's a great example in Cambridge as a mayor who grew up in public housing. When she speaks about it, she comes from a lived experience perspective, and there's a lot of power to that.
Yeah, I'll just give a shout out. Compass Working Capital is amazing. I believe Dr. James is on the board, and in a lot of ways, family self-sufficiency is part of that economic bundle I mentioned. We offer it to every newborn family that comes if they're eligible to try to work on it. I do think that in a lot of ways, this kind of demystifying this program is really important. And I do think that more and more, there may be ways in which we make it the default. You don't have to enroll in it. You're just offered it so that as your income goes up, you just automatically get it, right? And so I do think the ability to change programs is really important to try and meet needs. And so I'm a huge fan. I think to the point on like making commissions work, I think one thing, I just want to give a shout out. The Healthy Families Tax Coalition has been a really successful tax coalition in terms of getting from 15 to 30 to 40, being able to help domestic violence survivors file separately, even if they haven't been divorced. There are all these ways in which you have a team. And so I really think that the ability to fund, because teams don't happen by accident, right? Like you have to fund that infrastructure, you have to fund that coalition building for the long haul. So I would put, again, some shout out to funding coalitions over time with multi-year funding is really important, and that process makes a huge difference. And then for the Black Economic Council, I do think that to an extent, one of the biggest things I think to start to think about is investing in Black-led organizations. And so for us, that means partnering deeply with Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and thinking differently about what are the ways in which this amazing organization that does community organizing, that has a land trust, that is hosting a greater Boston Community Land Trust network, how are they the leaders? And we're kind of just the backers. Like we're there, like if you need help applying for something that you can't apply for yourself, great, let's apply together, or other things. But I think it really starts with investing in Black-led organizations. Thank you.
I'll be quick. I would echo what everyone said. I think, frankly, I came out of the labor movement. Strength in numbers is a real thing. It's easy to say no to a lobbyist. It's much more difficult to say no to 250 people with a lived experience. If you can put people's lived experiences front and center as much as they choose to do so, and I think you have more wins.
If you are an advocate, how are you feeling right now? Are there no advocates in the room? Y'all asleep? All right, if you're a policymaker, how are you feeling right now? Oh, wow. If you're a funder or a part of a foundation, how are you feeling right now? Woo, all right. Let's find them and make sure we block the doors before they leave. If you're just generally interested in this topic, a supporter, you've learned a lot, how are you feeling right now? There you go. Well, as we wrap up, why don't we give a great big round of applause for our panelists here. And on behalf of Mayor Wu, I want to thank you for this opportunity and this invitation. I want to invite Daphne to join us and to share some closing thoughts.
All right, I'm going to adjust this because I'm not as tall as Bob Giannino. Hi, everyone. Buenos dias. My name is Daphne Principe Griffin. I am the interim president and CEO for United Way. I do have some prepared brief remarks. I promise brief. But I absolutely have to just take a pause and just say, wow. It is, what a conversation. What a panel. What a way to start our day. I don't know about you, but I'm Shagun, just as you said, I'm excited. I'm ready. Let's go. Like, this is what we need to do. And so what we've heard today, beyond the policy changes that are desperately needed, we heard from Jesus, he said that poverty is a policy choice. beyond the public will that we need to build, that is so needed. Our panel has helped us recognize the cost of not doing anything. And so what we've heard today also has touched on the fundamental values that underpin the idea of a guaranteed basic income. And that is dignity, which we've heard, equality, and social justice. This is the conversation that many in this room have had for a very long time, right? We're tired of having this conversation. We need to see action. And so our charge for today is to take this conversation outside of our usual networks, because here we're preaching to the converted. So now we need to build other allies and other champions and other ambassadors of this work. It is important for us to bring others into this dialogue and advance our initiatives and our work and our passions around how we can foster financial security and mitigate inequality by ensuring that everyone has access to essential resources permanently, not another round of discussions. And so with that in mind, as we go into our day, I promised it would be brief. I want us, as Shagun said, just another huge round of applause and thank you to our panelists, our speaker, and to Bob Giannino, our wonderful colleague and friend who has led us in this work. So if you're not, after this panel discussion and our speakers and hearing from Jesus, you're not ready to mobilize about 15 or 100, like-minded individuals, we have a great way for you to stay connected to this conversation. So you were given this wonderful, nifty card. We make it very easy for you with a barcode that you can scan to join the conversation on our website. So we hope that you continue to do that. Thank you for coming. Have a great day, everyone. Que tengan buen día, and let's get going.